This morning I will be reading scriptures from Numbers chapter 13, chapter 14, and some verses from Joshua chapter 1. The Lord said to Moses, "Send some men to explore the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the Israelites. From each ancestral tribe, send one of its leaders." So at the Lord's command, Moses sent them out from the desert of Paran. All of them were leaders of the Israelites. These are the names of the men Moses sent to explore the land. Moses gave Hoshea, son of Nun, the name of Joshua. So they went up and explored the land from the desert of Zin as far as Rehob toward Lebo Hamath. They went up through the Negev and came to Hebron, where Ahiman, Sheshai, and Talmai, the descendants of Anak, lived. Hebron had been built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt. When they reached the valley of Eshcol, they cut off a branch bearing a single cluster of grapes. 2 of them carried it on a pole between them, along with some pomegranates and figs. That place was called the Valley of Eshcol, because of the cluster of grapes the Israelites cut off there. At the end of 40 days, they returned from exploring the land. They came back to Moses and Aaron and the whole Israelite community at Kadesh in the desert of Paran. There they reported to them and to the whole assembly and showed them the fruit of the land. They gave Moses this account: "We went into the land to which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here is its fruit. But the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites live in Negev. The Hittites, Jebusites, and Amorites live in the hill country, and the Canaanites live near the sea along the Jordan." Then Caleb silenced the people before Moses and said, "We should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it." But the men who had gone up with him said, "We can't attack those people. They are stronger than we are." That night, all the members of the community raised their voices and wept aloud. All the Israelites grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the whole assembly said to them, "If only we had died in Egypt or in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us to this land only to let us fall by the sword? Our wives and children will be taken as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt?" And they said to each other, "We should choose a leader and go back to Egypt." After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide, "Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people, get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I'm about to give them, to the Israelites. I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses. Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon, and from the great river, the Euphrates, all the Hittite country, to the Mediterranean Sea in the west. No one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you."
So one of the phrases that we use in the Hess household a lot, and ask one of my children and they will probably nod their heads in annoyance, is "We want you to dare to be great." To dare to be great is to take a chance, it's to take a risk, it's to step forward in the midst of your doubts or in the midst of the things that give you fear. Elaine, you dared to be great this morning in reading all those different names and whatnot. I appreciate that. Sometimes it doesn't strike me until the worship leaders in the midst of their reading. It doesn't really hit me how many crazy names there are in the passage. Thank you for that incredible reading. Dare to be great. Joshua dares to be great. He takes a risk. He takes a chance. So we want to talk about that story. And I was thinking about what it means to dare to be great. And I was thinking about my life, and I thought to myself, you know what I should have you all do is take a moment this week sometime, to sit down with sort of a notepad, a clean notepad and a pen, and draw a line. And on that line, mark all the places in your life where significant things happen, sort of your own timeline. And I want you to think about how many of those significant places involved you doing something that would be characterized by daring to be great. I thought about my own timeline. I imagined, asking my wife out on a date. I thought about going to seminary, and I imagined the moment where my wife said to me, "Don't you trust God?" and she convinced me that it was time to have children. Moments where we dare to be great. And then I want you to think a little bit deeper. And I want you to think about some of those places where maybe you missed the opportunity to dare to be great. I don't want us to linger on those things. By the grace of Jesus, God is still with us. But I like to think about just some of those times where we maybe missed an opportunity. I started thinking about the ways that I went to Ithaca College in Ithaca, New York, which was right next to Cornell, and I actually could have taken classes at Cornell, but I was afraid, and I didn't. And I wonder what might have been different if I'd have stepped out of my shoes and taken some classes at Cornell. Maybe I would have failed, who knows? And I think about other times in relationships and places where maybe I didn't take that step, or in the athletic field when maybe I just held back a little bit because of my fears and my doubts. I just want us to think about those things a little bit. Just think about our moments of daring to be great in the moments where we missed it. And as I was thinking about Joshua, and I was looking at his story, we can't really tell his story without thinking a little bit and talking a little bit about Moses. We studied Moses as a church. We had a whole series on the life of Moses, so we kind of have his timeline in our minds. Now, it was a while ago, so I will refresh your memories. Moses' timeline begins with a mother and a sister that dared to be great. Moses was living in a time when the Hebrews, the Israelites, were slaves to Egypt. And when Moses was born, he was supposed to be put to death because they didn't want too many male children. But his mother and his sister took him and they wove together a basket, and they placed him in the basket and put him into a river, which kind of seems like a crazy thing to do, but they knew that he would float down that river and hopefully someone would find him. And a princess of Egypt, an actual princess, found the baby and dared to be great herself, taking this Hebrew child to raise on her own. An Egyptian princess raising a Hebrew child. And so Moses has the opportunity to grow up as a prince of Egypt, even though he is of the family of those who are slaves. And we watch Moses' life, and I wonder how many times he had the opportunity to stand up, to dare to be great, and didn't. And then it sort of culminates in this moment where he sees one of his own people being beaten by a slave master, and he reacts. And he stands up, he dares to be great, and he kills the man. I don't know if that was the daring to be great, but certainly standing up for the slave was. And then he runs, and then he misses his opportunity to say, hey, this happened because we're doing something we shouldn't be doing. He takes off and he runs off into the wilderness. And then he has another opportunity to dare to be great when he sees a burning bush, something that to me would be kind of fearful, but he goes over to check it out. And then he has another opportunity where God and Moses are going back and forth. God's saying, I'm calling you, Moses, to set your people free from the tyranny of slavery. And Moses is like, no, I can't possibly do that. But in the end, he does. This is not a sermon about not being afraid. It's not a sermon about not having doubts. It's a sermon about having the courage to push through. And then we see Moses at the Red Sea with his enemies bearing down upon him, daring to be great again. In the wilderness, time and time again, daring to be great, standing up to the doubts of the people that he was serving. But then finally we come to the great defining moment for Moses. He's at the promised land. And he takes 12 spies and he sends them out to check out the land and to see what it's like. And they go, and they come back, and they have these stories of the fruit, the land of milk and honey. It's like they come back with these stories of grapes the size of your head. And they've got all this wonderful stuff to say, but there's this catch. Not only are the grapes the size of your head, but the enemies and their walled cities make us look like grasshoppers. And the fear sort of takes over the people. And they react. They say, if only we had died in Egypt or in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us to this land only to let us fall by the sword? Our wives and our children will be taken as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt? And they said to each other, we should choose a new leader and go back to Egypt. And so God keeps the people there, stuck in the moment where they miss the opportunity to dare to be great and to go into the promised land for an entire generation until Moses passes away and God comes to Joshua. Now, in the Bible, the stories of Joshua are kind of amazing and great. It doesn't surprise me. The word Joshua in Greek is Jesus. Joshua, in many ways, in the Bible, sets up as Joshua as a predecessor to our Jesus. Joshua is the faithful one. Joshua is the giver of life. God comes to Joshua, and he says to him, you are going to lead the people across the Jordan. I'm going to give you every place. I'm going to give you everything. I will take care of you. I will lead you, God says. And Joshua goes. Now, this is significant. Joshua was one of those that were the spies that went to see the promised land. Joshua knows the cities. He knows how big the people were. You can bet that Joshua was terrified. You can bet that Joshua had doubts. But he set them aside, and he trusted God, and he led the people into the promised land. This happens for him over and over and over again. One of the great Bible stories is from Joshua chapter 6, the actual book of Joshua, the story of Joshua. It's a story about this city called Jericho. They come to the city, and the city is all shut up, and the city has huge walls. If you've ever watched VeggieTales has this great scene with these little French-speaking peas who are shouting insults at the Israelites from the top of their wall because they know that these Israelites can't break through their town, that there's no way the Israelites are going to get in there. And the Israelites know the same thing. But God comes to Joshua, and he says, I want you to take your people. I want you to take your soldiers. I want you to take your priests. And you're going to travel around the city for 6 days. And then you're going to do it again on the seventh day, and the walls are going to come tumbling down. Now, can you imagine Joshua taking that to his advisors? Here's our plan. This is how we're going to get in the city. We're going to march around while the French peas shout insults at us. But they did. Joshua followed through, again, I'm sure, with mountains and loads of doubts and fears. Joshua, over and over again, dares to be great, calling us and inviting us to dare to be great. What are our fears? What are the fears that we have in our lives? What are the doubts that we contend with on a daily basis? Is it the fear of failure? Is that why we don't take that extra class? Is that why we don't look for a new job when we don't like the one that we have? Is that why we don't try harder on the athletic field because we're afraid that we will fail? Even though to not try basically makes sure that it happens? Are we afraid to look inside ourselves and see the darkness within? Every Sunday morning we come to this place dressed in our best or close to it. And we put on a smiling face because we're all happy and we're all wonderful and everything's great all the time. And yet over and over again I find myself praying with people, inviting people into a deeper vulnerability And often inside there is shame and anger that we just cannot let out. We're afraid of what's inside. Are we afraid of confession? Are we afraid of forgiving because it's going to make us look weak? We talk about as a church inviting, equipping, no, I'm missing something. Inviting, engaging, and equipping all generations to be more like Jesus. Are we afraid to invite and engage because we don't know the person across the aisle from us in church? Are we afraid to reach out because we're not sure about people, because there's people that look different from us or act differently than we do? Are we afraid of those who are other than us? Are we afraid to take steps as a church? Are we afraid to give because we're pretty certain we won't have enough? Are we afraid to build because we think that the theological ideas of the day might tear our church in half? Or are we afraid to build because we look around and we see churches, the church, faltering? What are the fears that we have, and how are they holding us back from being all that we can be? How does Joshua do it? What was different about Joshua than Moses or all of those other spies that went out? I think it's pretty simple. I think Joshua heard clearly these words in verse 5 from Joshua 1. No one, Joshua, will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. That is the promise of our God to Joshua. And that was the promise to our God through Jesus. Jesus is another one who has this huge, monstrous timeline of daring to be great over and over again. But one of my absolute favorite verses in the Bible is when Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane. He knows he's going to die. In this place, we see the incredible humanity of Jesus as he falls on his knees, looks up to God and prays, God, take this away from me. Don't make me give my life for these people. Don't make me go through this pain. Don't leave me, God. We see his humanity. And we see the incredible, amazing divinity of Jesus as he stands up and says, not my will, but yours be done, God. And he steps forward because Jesus knew that God was with him. And he knew that the work that God was doing in him would be worth it. And then Jesus promises us. He promises you and he promises me that he will be with us. In Matthew 28, he says to his disciples, go, therefore, make disciples of all nations, and know this, I will be with you always. That promise gives us the ability to take risks, to make mistakes. It gives us the ability to fail. Because God's with us no matter what happens. God is with us whether we make the mistakes or whether we succeed beautifully. God is with us, and that is all that matters, and that is all that we need. Knowing that Jesus is with us empowers us to dare to be great. We are sons and daughters of God. If we fail, it doesn't mean anything about us except that we're willing to take a risk and put our trust in God. I talk to my children, as I said, often about daring to be great. As a matter of fact, they would probably at this point in time call it a lecture. Daddy, you going to lecture us again? Well, I wouldn't call it a lecture. I'd call it something different from that. I'd call it trying to help you. And I thought to myself, if I'm going to encourage my children over and over again to dare to be great, maybe I need to be willing to dare to be great. What does that look like for Pastor Hunter? To dare to be great. I feel like over the last several months, I've heard people in this congregation saying, Hunter, we need you to lead. We need you to lead. And I'm thinking to myself, what does that mean? And I'm not sure yet. I don't know that I've completely have it figured out. But I know this. What I'm particularly good at is making a church feel good about itself. I made Zion feel good about itself. I think that I'm making Nestville feel better about itself. But I feel like for me to dare to be great, there's got to be something more than that. It's not just about feeling good about ourselves. It's about doing something utterly amazing. I think to myself, don't trip. I think to myself, in 30 years, if the next Roy Burkholder comes along to write the book about Nestville Mennonite Church, the last 50 years since the book, or however long it's been since the book was written. When people open up those pages and there's a chapter about the time that Hunter Hess was the pastor of Nestville Mennonite Church, I really don't want those pages to read, "This was a nice church that felt good about itself." I want to dare to be great. I want us to dare to be great together. And I don't know what that looks like. Maybe when I say that it terrifies you, and maybe it should. Does it look like us doing the entire building project, all $5 million worth, and raising $2 million on top of that so that we can start an after-school program for Mannheim Township? Maybe. I don't know. Does it look like us raising funds so that we can send MDS groups from our church, our own people, to Mexico, Puerto Rico, Houston, and to Florida? I'm not sure. I know in the midst of this group there's probably hundreds of ideas. Let's get together and make one happen, maybe two. Let's do something together to dare to be great. In the end, I think I would rather you all look back at me 30 years from now and say, "Boy, that was a failure," than to say, "Boy, it was just a nice time in our church history." Because I'd rather fail big and take the chance of glorifying God in some major, unbelievable way than to just be okay. I remember it was a pastoral review that cut me deeply, and I think now I love it. There was a gentleman that said in our review, he said, Hunter's okay. Hunter's okay. I don't want to be okay. I want to dare to be great, and I want you all to dare to be great with me. And I want us to trust that Jesus is with us no matter what happens, that Jesus is guiding us and leading us to wherever we go together, and that will be enough. At this time, I'd like to invite Amy to come forward to sing for us. I encourage you to just close your eyes and listen and pray. What does it look like for this church? What does it look like for you to trust God to lead us to dare to be great?